All right, everybody. Give me a second. We're going to figure this out. This is my first run of my first PowerPoint, screencasted. It's number 54 on your right-hand side, the Spanish-American War. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about American foreign policy as opposed to talking about things that are going on inside the country. We're going to talk about our actions toward other nations. All right. Now, we've only touched on this a few times so far this year. It's really, like we've said a bunch of times, America is not a country that's thinking outward until the 20th century, really. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first thing we're going to do is review a little bit of what it was like before 1898. What was American foreign policy before 1898? All right. So we spent a bunch of time talking about Washington's farewell address, and as soon as you see that, everybody knows we have to think about America being neutral and rejecting the idea of alliances. And if you remember, I asked you a bunch of questions about this year. Why? Why did Washington believe in that? And I'm sure you remember that he believed that because we were young, we were weak, we weren't able to compete with these European nations with respect to our military strength and so on. So he rejected the idea of alliances. He wanted to stay neutral. He wanted to stay isolated. So that was the first pillar of American foreign policy, would be this idea of neutrality and isolationism. All right, good. So far, so good. The second pillar of early American foreign policy is the purchase of land, or the idea of the Louisiana Purchase, which we talked about. As you can see here, it doubles the size of the United States. All right. At the time, in 1804, the United States boundary ended at the Mississippi River. That's the Mississippi River. And this area here is the purchase. All right. So it doubled the size of the United States. It was purchased from Louisiana. Remember, it has to do with loose interpretation of the Constitution. And remember, loose interpretation means that you don't do exactly what's in the Constitution. In this case, Thomas Jefferson used the power to make treaties as a way of purchasing land. And that's the second part of American foreign policy. The third one that we talked about was the Monroe Doctrine. All right, and this is a great cartoon to show you exactly what we mean by the Monroe Doctrine. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this cartoon just like we always do. The first thing you do is you look at the whole thing in total, right? Get an idea of all the different details in it, the ideas behind it. Start thinking about some of the symbols, what's the larger items on here, and then you do your you put the lines on it, the cross, right, so that you can figure out and look at the details in even greater in a more detailed way. All right, I know that doesn't make sense, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to draw that cross right now. All right, so now we have the cross on there, and on this side you have Uncle Sam, right? And he represents the United States government. You have down here part of the globe, the Western Hemisphere, right? And the Monroe Doctrine, the hat, Uncle Sam's hat, is across on top of both the North and South America, right? It's kind of in the middle of this hemisphere here. And then you have the Eastern Hemisphere on this side with the European powers on this side. And that's basically what the Monroe Doctrine was all about, all right? The idea that we would be the leader on this side of the world, the Western Hemisphere, and the Europeans would be the leaders on the Eastern Hemisphere. And we no longer want the Europeans to come onto our side of the world. So the U.S. would take the leadership role in the Western Hemisphere, not Europe anymore. It would be ours to be the leaders of. The fourth pillar is this idea of manifest destiny. We're going to extend our borders from Atlantic to Pacific. So before, we discussed the Louisiana Purchase. And the Louisiana Purchase was this area right here. All right. So one way in which we accumulated territory was through purchase. But that's not the only way, right? We annexed Texas down here in the 1840s. We went to war with Mexico, and as a result, we got the Mexican Cession, right? We went to war, we went to purchase, we purchased down here, the Gadsden Purchase, and we made treaties with other countries, all right? So these are all the different ways in which we acquired territory, and that's foreign policy, right? Annexing from Mexico, that's another country. Buying from Mexico, that's another country. Buying from France, that's another country. Those are all examples of American foreign policy. So now we're going to talk about the causes of the Spanish-American War. The first cause of the Spanish-American War was the Spanish who controlled Cuba were brutally enforcing their control over the Cuban people. The Cuban people wanted to be free, and the Spanish didn't want that to happen. So they brutally enforced their control over Cuba. All right, here are some images to express that. So the second reason for American, or cause for American entrance into the Cuban Revolution and in the Spanish-American War was yellow journalism. That's a really important vocabulary word. That's why it's underlined up there, my friends. Yellow journalism. All right, yellow journalism was a term that was used to express how American newspapers exaggerated and distorted the news. In this case, Spanish cruelty in Cuba. Okay, so these are images. Some of them, obviously, were accurate to some extent, but they were over-exaggerated. They were made to seem much worse than they were in reality. You have the Cuban mother here with her dying son, right? And you can see how skinny she looks from starvation and deprivation of the Spanish. Here's a picture of some kids and individuals who were starved in a Spanish camp, a concentration camp, really the first concentration camps in history. And then you have over here how the Spaniards would search American women. And obviously this is exaggerated. They like strip searcher here. That's not what happened, but they point this out. Why? Because they sell newspapers. What happened? Americans want to go to war. They look at all these things and say, hey, we need to get down there and we need to help. So the combination of the brutality of the Spanish with the exaggerations of these newspapers lead more and more Americans to think maybe we should get involved in what's going on in Cuba. The last, or the immediate cause, I guess you can say, of American involvement in the Cuban Revolution and the start of the Spanish-American War was the sinking of the USS Maine. It was a battleship. It was in Havana Harbor, and it was just observing what was going on. There wasn't war yet, and it mysteriously explodes. Looking back now, it was an accident, but at the time, because people's their attitudes were heightened, right? They were excited about what was going on. They were tense. People blamed the Spanish for it, and as you can see from these this yellow newspaper, the New York Journal, you can see how they exaggerated and made more of it than it might have been. So I'll point those out right now. All right. So the New York Journal: who destroyed the Maine? Where there's an enemy. This was not an accident. All these things were not true. We didn't know that yet. We hadn't investigated it. It was caused by a Spanish mine. No one really knew what had caused it. Spanish treachery. This got everybody hyped up. Everyone was excited. Everyone wants to go to war. They see the Spanish cruelty. They exploded this U.S. warship. Americans were killed. It's time to go to war with the Spanish. Here's another cartoon to represent this kind of heightened tension and yellow journalism, right? Obviously, the Spanish don't look like this brute here, and with the blood on their hands, right? They're trying to express this idea that the Spanish are guilty of these crimes. So we're taking a look at this in total, all right? Reading the words, looking at the exaggerated figures, thinking about the symbols, trying to see what's going on here, okay? So let's take a look at it like we always do. Whoops. Got to go back. All right. Sorry. All right, we draw a crooked line. And we draw the other one. And we kind of look at the details. Obviously here, he's a brute, right? He's not human. He's inhuman. That's easier to go to war with inhumans, right? People who are not human, it's easy to go to war with them. Bottom left here, we have this gravestone. The Maine was sailors were murdered by Spain. And he's stepping here on the flag, mutilated by Spain, mutilated U.S. soldiers. So that's what we can assume these people are in the background. The bloody knife here, the bloody hands, and he represents Spain. So you're kind of looking at it all, and you get the idea that what's the point of view of this cartoon? It's time for us to do something about this Spanish brute. Okay? Good. All right. We go to war with Spain. It's a very quick war. They're very, very weak. We're a growing power, and the United States wins the war against Spain. What are the results of the Spanish-American War? The U.S. defeated Spain. The U.S. acquires Spanish territories in the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. And you have to have Guam. That's important, right? Because if you're lost, you at least know where to say you are. You know, when you say, hey, I don't know where I am. I'm in Guam. If we didn't have Guam, what would we say? The real question is, what do people in Guam say when they're lost? The U.S. changed from a nation without colonies to one that controlled an overseas empire. For the first time in American history, we're going to be the ones who have colonies, and that's really important. That's what we're going to spend a little bit more time on this week, this idea of imperialism. In 100 years, we went from a colony to a colonial power, right? We were a colony of Britain, and now we are a colonial power. We control areas in the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. And the Cubans are independent. Kind of independent, with the United States kind of looking over what they're going to be and what they're going to do. All right, so this is our left-hand side for this lesson. This is the title down here, The Duty of the Hour, to save her not only from Spain, but from a worse fate. And you can see right here, that's what it says right on the bottom there. Okay, that's the title. So you're going to take a look at this cartoon. And what we're going to do is answer this question here. Do you think that our participation in the Spanish-American War was justified? So from the notes, from the evidence that we had, right, the documents that you saw, do you think our participation in the Spanish-American War was justified? Should we have done it? So what you're going to do is you're going to make a claim. You're going to provide evidence, all right, historical details, and the reasoning, the why, the because, or the explain. When we talk about a claim, you're going to make the point that it is justified or not justified, and the evidence is going to come from all the textual evidence that we saw or something I talked about, and you're going to give the reasoning why and because. Make sure you check the Schoology site to understand how to do the assignment and how to hand that assignment in. All right? So this is my first screencast. It wasn't too good, wasn't too bad, but we're getting closer to getting it better. I will see you guys soon.